Suck, right?
Check my check.
And then all the time it's like, what's his name with his hands in the interview? He's like, I don't know what to do with my hands.
I don't know what to do with my hands. Check 1 2 check.
Check 1 2.
Yeah, that's good. So we're sitting here with my good friend, Mr. Justin Pearson, and you had some exciting times. A lot of people maybe wouldn't call it a fun time, but you were using the Second Amendment for good. And a lot of folks have been trying to interview you, including even the NRA, to use it as kind of a case study or an example of how a citizen who's properly equipped and also has a peripheral awareness can step into a bad situation and perhaps prevent a kidnapping.
Yeah, so just got home from work like any day of the week. Wasn't suspecting anything weird. And, you know, my dad came over and I was showing him a new pair of binoculars I had picked up, and we were standing in the living room and heard this real strange, like, roaring sound, and didn't know what it was exactly. So went to the front door, and when I opened the door, I seen this big body late model Beamer go blowing by at a very high rate of speed, somewhere on the order of probably 60-ish, 70 maybe even miles an hour. And my house is about perfectly centered in the middle of a road that's about probably a quarter mile or more long. And so I kind of just ran out to the sidewalk and looked down to see what was going on, and I caught a glimpse of him right at the time that his car was spinning out. He had lost control of it. The car spun around like about at least a 180, and at that point I thought for sure it was going to go into the house at the end of the block. So I turned around, I ran back in the house. Well, I yelled at my dad, you know, because he was kind of halfway in between. I said, hey, grab my phone, you know, because I was going to call the police, obviously. And I run inside, he hands me my phone. I grab my sidearm, because I never leave home without it, and call 911. And originally I just thought it was a reckless driver. So I told him this guy's hauling down the street and lost control of his vehicle, almost wrecked into a house. And so she asked me if I had a license plate or not. And I said, well, you know, I couldn't have seen it when he went by. He was going too fast. But at that time, since he lost control, he started to come back towards me, pulled to the side of the road and stopped. And so I thought that was a perfect opportunity, you know, to go and get the plate. So I just kind of jogged down the road. My Bluetooth with the 911 dispatch in my ear, my firearm hidden under my shirt is normal. And I just started jogging down the road. But as I got closer, the door of the BMW opened and the guy got out and he grabbed a young child from the front yard there and was forcing him into the vehicle. So now I flipped from just kind of jogging down the street to try and get a license plate to holy crap, this just escalated, you know, really bad. So I'm now running at him full force. I reach under my shirt and I grab the handle of my firearm, but fortunately he had this, you know, he had the driver's side door open and he had the child that he was forcing, basically got him into the driver's seat of the car. And then because of that, could not get in the car. So he was trying to get the child to the passenger seat right about the time that I closed within probably 30 yards of him or so. So when at this time, this all happened very quick. It was only several seconds start to finish. It was less than a minute by a long shot. So anyhow, I lifted up my shirt and grabbed my handle as I was running towards him, and I yelled, "Hey, stop!" to get his attention. So he paused. You know, the child's in the driver's seat at this point. He hasn't gotten him out to the passenger side yet. He paused long enough to make eye contact with me, see my firearm, and see me charging at him full speed. And at that time, the youngster had realized this and jumped out and ran back in the yard. The situation was that there was a pair of elderly people there too. It turns out later that they were his grandparents. They were right next to the door. The child's in the driver's seat, and the bad guy's right in the middle with the door open. So I had no safe way of taking a shot, but he didn't know that I knew that, and so I never actually drew the weapon out of the holster. But my intent was, regardless of what was going to happen, he's not getting that child, not while I'm there. And so if he was going to leave with that child, it was going to be over my dead body. But at that moment, that pause when we made eye contact, and I think he realized the gravity of the situation. It was only, you know, maybe a second or two, just long enough for the youngster to get out. When that happened, though, he luckily the fight or flight response, I guess, kicked in, and he dove in the car and slammed the door shut and started to try and get away. The problem for him was now because he had lost control of the vehicle, he was now facing me instead of away from me. And so now when he drove past, I was able to get the license plate clear as day. Anyhow, the 911 operator, when I yelled out, he's grabbed a child and he's forcing him in the car. She could tell by my, I guess maybe the tone of my voice that, this was no joke. And she kind of yelled back at me, but where are you at? What is your location? So, there was back and forth in between, but I knew that the police were on the way. She asked me if the child was injured. And I said, I don't know, but to play it safe, we definitely need paramedics. I don't know what's going on yet. So they sent the fire department. It took them probably 5 or 6 minutes to get there, but the police department didn't show up for quite a while. It was a long time. It seemed like an eternity. I mean, I'm not criticizing them. I don't know what was going on in that area. I know there's budget cuts. They're down personnel, but it took a very long time, long enough for the 911 dispatcher, who's still in my ear, to ask me if I was going to stay there or if I needed to leave. And I told him, I said, I'm not going anywhere. This guy just split, but I don't know if he's coming back. For all I know, he went up the street, turned the corner, opened his trunk, and got whatever out of his trunk, or his friends, or who knows if he's coming back. And so it took a while for the police to get there, but when they did, they basically thanked me for handling that right. I mean, they didn't criticize any part of it. They said that they felt that I handled that exactly how they would have hoped that I would have handled it. Looking back, hindsight's always 20/20.
So is there anything that you have been previously psychologically prepared for this more than other people? And I know that you're into quite a depth of firearms training, actually. And since you're a little kid, for a long time, you've been rolling with police ride-alongs and rolling with SWAT teams and stuff, just
Absolutely.
learning everything from every angle. What component of your reaction was, determined by your training, you think, or just by natural moral composure, being presented in the form it did?
Yeah, that's an interesting question that hasn't been asked. Basically, yeah, I've been a firearms enthusiast my whole life, and at every opportunity I get to learn from anyone, police, military, civilian, doesn't matter. I'm always an open book. I'm willing to listen, and I've trained with a lot of guys and gals over the years, and I've also, like you said, I've been on a lot of police ride-alongs. I was going on sometimes more than one a month for several months in a row for years and years. And I've been with every law enforcement entity in the entire area, North Las Vegas, Metro, Highway Patrol, Parks and Recreation. I mean, you name it, right?
So your ability to report this incident in a coherent manner to the 911 officer, how much of that was, you think, enhanced with your sobriety of mind at the moment this happened by your experience level? Can you expound on that a little more?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because depending on how you look at it, I've had experience with people that have been in similar situations where they didn't react as well simply because not everybody is the same, obviously. And I don't know how much of it is genetic and how much of it is experience, but sometimes people under extreme stress, they pause, they second guess themselves, they hesitate. In the time that it took watching the video footage, and I've never put that in the public realm. I did contact the detectives and gave them fair share. They never contacted me back, so I don't think they care if I share the footage. The footage shows almost everything except for I didn't have a camera exactly at the car itself, but you can see the BMW go through several different camera angles at a high rate of speed, me running down the street back and forth. But in the time that it took, I'd have to look back on it. I'd hate to put a number on there, but it was measured in seconds, not minutes, from the complete start to the complete finish. And at the time that it went from, hey, I'm going to go out and I'm going to get a license plate, to holy crap, he just took a child out of the front yard and is stuffing him in the car, felt like 15 minutes in my brain. I mean, it slows down so much that I thought of several different ways this could go and how I was going to react in a way that was the best of my abilities. And I went through a couple of different scenarios of, was I going to try to stop if the vehicle started in motion and he actually was successfully getting the child in there? What could I do to stop that? If he pulled out a weapon, what was I going to do? Because he didn't have anything in his hands but the child at the time. I mean, all these things are going through my head, but I never once in my mind had a conflict of whether or not I was going to have to stop him. The question was, to what level of force was I going to use? Not, was I going to be able to do this? I've never had a question of that. And I don't, I can't predict what could have happened. I don't know his mindset. He was, at the moment he was acting crazy, right? And I didn't know anything of the details. I knew a guy acting completely crazy, driving a car like a maniac, grabbing a young child. That's all I needed to know is at that situation, no matter who he is, no matter who this child is, he's not leaving, child's not going with him, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to stop him. That was it, period. And that's a decision I made the moment I reached for my firearm, but luckily I never had to take it out.
So with a lot of the anxiety being taken off the table, potentially, I'm just guessing because I know maybe how it works in terms of when people get involved in these situations, a lot of the anxiety is like, am I even able to address this threat? But there was no question in your mind if you could address the threat. You were just using that power in your brain to try to analyze the proper use of force and the dynamics, the more complicated dynamics of how to most efficiently de-escalate the situation or retain your cool.
Yeah, it was one of those things where to look back on it, hindsight's always 20/20, but when you're talking, moments of reaction versus, what is the penalties, what's going to happen? Looking back on it, I thought, this would have been a horrible thing had I had to use deadly force, but had I, in the instant, I have the footage of, you can see me running out, then running back and grabbing my phone and my firearm. I look back at it and go, man, what would have happened had I not thought to grab my firearm? Because at the moment that I was doing that, I was doing it simply because I'd never leave home without it. And even running down the street is leaving home, right? So for me, I was going to get a license plate, firearms coming with me. If I'm going to get a cheeseburger, firearms going with me. If I'm going to pick up a friend from the airport, firearms going with me. Looking back on it, it would have been very, very easy, and probably most people would have not grabbed their firearm, would have just grabbed their phone and ran down there. Now, I would have been running down the street unarmed at that point, right? And then I had no way to predict what was going to happen. So had it turned out the same way it did, which we know now, hindsight's 20/20, we know what happened. He was going to take the child. I intervened. He didn't, right? That's the simplest part of it. I don't know that outcome would have happened had I not had my firearm. I'm not a big, scary dude, and he was,
And so you think the firearm effectively deterred him and is what was maybe responsible for turning that tide of his reaction. Otherwise, it could have easily evolved into a car chase or some kind of kinetic conflict with the child, potentially getting hurt. But the presence of a good guy with a firearm and his perception of lethal force being inflicted upon him for his actions could have, saved everybody a lot of actual physical pain.
I haven't spoken with this guy. I don't know if they caught him or not. I don't know any of the outcome because a minor is involved. They'll probably never tell me anyways, and he'll never, I don't know. But I can say that his size was substantial. I'm 6'4", 185, but I'm not by any means, as you know, a menacing looking guy, right? But this guy was not only very large in size compared to me, he was absolutely to some level of agitation way beyond what I was, whether it was just adrenaline or it was some kind of chemical, whether it was alcohol or, something more powerful. I don't know. But I'm not a trained fighter by any means, and I'm certainly not professional level. Who knows what his background was?
But he was locked on his target of accomplishing the kidnapping for sure.
There was no doubt in my mind by his actions that was his intent. He was taking the child, he was pushing him in the car already, and I intervened at the moment that he was pushing the child to the passenger seat. And clearly by the presence of the grandparents that I found out later and what they were doing, they were clearly trying to stop him. This wasn't like, it was obvious that the child wasn't in any danger that he was trying to get the child out of. If anything, he was putting the child into danger. So, at that moment, I didn't, when I'm rolling through the, what could possibly happen right now and what am I going to do scenarios type stuff in my head, at that moment, it never once crossed my mind that this was a kosher situation and that any of this should be going on.
So if you were 1 or 2 seconds later, this could have went the other way and he could have escaped with this kid.
Yeah, and at the time, if he was able to get the child in the vehicle and get in motion, there was no good way for me to stop him that would not have really put the child in further danger. Even if I was to use deadly force to stop him, he's in the vehicle's already moving, and the child is in the vehicle.
How handy was your firearm at the moment this went down? Let's recap again.
Okay.
Where exactly were you at when you heard this interesting sound?
I was in my living room, kind of like a dining room, basically here by the front door.
Yeah, just like 10 feet off to your side here.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. And then
You're
we
in the house?
we
Yep.
open the front door, and then the beamer goes whoosh, and the sound of what was making so much noise is there was a football helmet wedged underneath the car at the time. I don't know how it got there. But it was dragging on the ground, and the car was going at such a high rate of speed. I don't know that I would have even heard the car until it was losing control down the street, and I don't know if I had gone out there in time to see him taking away the child. It was just, looking back on it, the timeline, had it not gone down exactly the way it did, it would have gone down very different than the way it did.
Sure.
For sure.
And how easily accessible was your firearm? It was on your person?
It was sitting on the dining room table right by the front door, which is where I normally take it off when I get in the house.
Mm-hmm.
So it was
you had it
immediately
immediately accessible.
Yeah, and I tell people that if you're going to carry a firearm, carry a holster that is easy to take on and off, because if you do it your whole life, it becomes more of an annoyance than anything. And if it's too annoying, sometimes people leave them behind. Mm-hmm. I like paddle holsters that you can take on and off very quickly. That's how mine is. I was able to take it from the table, put it on me in my normal carry position, 3 o'clock on the hip, underneath my shirt, in seconds.
And so the transition was because you kept it in a handy place. And of course, I'm assuming this weapon was hot and ready to go.
Always, yeah. They're useless if they're not.
Yeah.
I don't. When we're not home, everything we own that's dangerous is in that big safe behind you over here. When we are home, that safe door is open first, and our whatever we were carrying on our person is normally on the table right where we're kind of in the living room. And we also
within grabbing range, within 3 seconds.
Within seconds, I can grab one. I don't have to defeat any safe or turn any dials. That it makes them useless at that point. Yeah. Agreed.
So if you had to have gotten into your safe to retrieve your firearm, by the time you get down the street, that kid would have been long gone.
Yeah, and if you talk to any of the witnesses, read the police report, ask my dad, he actually used the binoculars to try and read the license plate as the guy was fleeing. It was the point at which I closed close enough for him to hear and see me and make visual contact with my firearm that was, like I said, still in the holster. I didn't draw it out, but I clearly had my hand on it. It was displayed. He knew my intentions. There's no doubt in my mind about that. We locked eye contact. It may or may, I can tell you that it would have been just a few seconds. Whatever the time it would have taken for that huge guy. I mean, this child was 6 years old, very small child. He could have physically, he was in the process of moving him to the passenger seat, and that was it. That was the end game. He was going to be in the driver's seat at that point, and he was gone. So I was wearing flip-flops, and I should probably have a Guinness record somewhere because I don't know how I didn't run out of them. I've seen a lot of people in life-threatening situations run out of their flip-flops. I somehow kept them on at that speed. I ran as fast as I humanly could, and he knew it. He saw me barreling down at him, and I guarantee he didn't see some big scary figure coming at him that made him change his mind. And
not to recap too much here, but the presence of your firearm was fundamental in his reaction.
I haven't spoken with him, so I can't speak for him, but I can tell you in my mind and those around me and talking to the grandparents of the child, there was no doubt in my mind that he had no fear of me or anyone else. So the only variable between me or anybody else that was present was my firearm. So when you eliminate the other possibilities, the only thing left clearly has to be the case, in my opinion. So my belief is simple. If you are of sound mind and ability, there's zero reason for you not to be armed. And if you are armed, it's your obligation to be properly trained so that you're not furthering the danger. You're helping the situation, because no firearm can operate itself, and they're only as good as the person behind them. So even if that just means going to the range, a few times a year with somebody who knows what they're doing, that's better than nothing. But certainly, if you, like I said, sound mind and body, if you know what you're doing, get a firearm, get trained on how to use it, and by all means, never leave it at home, no matter what. Always keep it with you. You wouldn't leave your spare tire at home because you didn't feel like getting a flat tire that day. And so, never leave home without it. I was seconds away from leaving without it, and it would have been a complete different story if I had.
Mm-hmm. And even within your home, it was within immediate access.
Right. Any electronic device it's not whether or not it will fail, it's when. It's a timeline. I don't
You're
care
talking
what
about
it
a
is.
safe that you can open.
Anything, yeah.
supposedly
Anything
very quickly.
mechanical or electrical will fail at some point in its life. And if you're not well trained in that, if you are under stress and adrenaline and your heart rate is going and you're trying to do fine motor skill stuff like biometric, pressing buttons, especially in those hidden hand safes, those things to me are worthless. They're okay if you're not home and you have children or someone you don't want access to the firearm. That's perfectly okay. Don't get me wrong. But as soon as you get home, that safe should be opened and that firearm should be accessible. So if you can't be left somewhere and be safe because there's youngsters, it needs to be on you. Otherwise,
even in the safety of your own home, which you have multiple layers of security we won't get into.
Yeah.
But I mean, you got a pretty secure home besides just firearms. And in a nice neighborhood, a lot of people get very complacent and put it away completely.
Absolutely.
And but having it accessible immediately, a lot of guys even just carry them around all day in their house, and people might think they're radical to have that weapon so handy.
Right.
They would even maybe accuse a guy of being paranoid.
Sure.
But in this is a emblematic of a citizen's duty to be able to come to other people's aid.
Completely agree.
Especially if you're a good person.
To me, life is really as simple as good exists because there's bad, just like hot exists because there's cold. You can't have one without the other, otherwise their definition has no meaning. There's no reason for their existence. So every time there's a good guy who has a tool to help someone in need, that's one more point on the good side versus the bad guys. Evil doesn't care about laws. They don't care about political correctness. The definition of a bad guy is, an evil person is someone who does bad things to other people. So every time you do something to take away a tool from a good guy, you're simply adding that tool to the toolbox for the bad guy. That's all you're doing. In the many years I've been doing this, I've come across a lot of people, more so law enforcement, military than civilians, that especially if they carry for a living, they oftentimes get home and they want to relax, and the first thing they want to do is put their firearm down. And if they're going to go out and have fun, a lot of times they don't bring it. The thing is, there's no way to know if or when you'll ever be called upon. So there's no good way. There's no probabilities of what days or what temperatures, or what weather is out there that you could leave your firearm and have a less of a chance of needing it. It's like a spare tire. You have it because you never know when or if you're going to need it. So the worst thing you can ever do is be a well-trained asset to humanity and not bring the most pivotal part of your toolkit in order to keep things right. That's to me, it's a simple philosophy, but maybe it's complex to some. But